UFC 287 is almost here, and we have an incredibly exciting co-main event with Jorge Masvidal versus Gilbert Burns. Mark and I are going to pose the question, what if Masvidal wins and what's next for him? But before we do that, if you're brand new here, make sure you subscribe as we have brand new videos every single week. So Mark, with Jorge, he really is the underdog in this fight. But if he can get a win here over Gilbert Burns, that'll really push him back into that top 10 of the rankings. Do you think that'll put him in prime position for a title shot?
Well, I think taking everything into consideration, like as in the style of the opponent, the huge name that Masvidal is, I think if he does beat Burns, it's not only going to project his ranking, even though that's just made up anyway, I think it's going to do so much more for him to prove, okay, yeah, I've had a rough couple of years, but I am here to stay. Because he's always said that he wants that belt before he ends up retiring, that kind of thing. And he is long in the tooth. So I think that, he's not ultimately too far away from retirement. So I think if he does win, it's going to do so much more for him than just if there was just an 11th ranked fighter, just anyone else.
If Jorge doesn't get a title shot out of this, who do you think his next opponent will be?
That's a tough one, to be fair. Just as like you think, well, surely it's got to make sense. But then again, it is the UFC, and names and popularity contests can overtake logic sometimes. I think. Do you think it could warrant even a third Usman fight?
No.
No. When it's 2-0, I don't really see the need for a trilogy anyway. I know we've seen it happen numerous times in the UFC, but I think I'm not so sure. I could just pluck a random name out, sort of thing, but I think it's got to make sense. I'll probably be more clear, presuming that Jorge beats Gilbert. It'll probably be more clear in the aftermath who we'd like to see him fight next.
Yeah, for sure. I think, though, if I'm Dana White and I've got a big name like Masvidal, he's getting older, he's probably not going to have another title run, but he's got a big name. I'm going to put him up against Shavkat Rakhmonov. I think Shavkat can come in, absolutely demolish him, and take all of that name value. And I've now got this brand new shiny star with a huge name who's ready to be pushed up.
It's upsetting, though, that thought, isn't it? All Masvidal's done, how long he's been there. And then just the way you worded that, I think I'd just feed Shavkat a little bit, just to project a star and then just watch George clean up the octagon after or something. Of course, I am joking. That would be a great fight. And obviously we can see in his last fight against Jeff Neal with Shavkat that it can be hit. It is definitely possible. And in such a brawler like Masvidal, that could be an interesting matchup.
Well, talking of Jorge cleaning up the octagon, if he does lose against Gilbert Burns, do you think that's it for him? Do you think he has to retire?
I could see it happening, but again, I can't see it happening as well. Because I think Masvidal, if he does lose to Gilbert Burns, I think they could probably give him a good few fun legacy fights, like in this Wonderboy Thompson, the BMF versus the NMF. That kind of thing. A rematch with them would be great. There's a good few fun fights in there for him to do, especially maybe if he does lose to Gilbert, they could sort of learn the lesson, if you will, and just give him strikers. Give him strikers, create fireworks, get him an extra 50 Gs when someone goes down, that kind of thing. Is there any fights that you could potentially see for Jorge Masvidal if he does lose?
It's really tricky, isn't it? Because like you were saying, it'd have to be like legacy fights and stuff. It'd have to be, fighters kind of going out their way as well. Kind of people like Wonderboy, stuff like that. A fight that would be great, I think, if Conor beats Chandler and Conor wants to kind of stay in that 170 division, I think him versus Masvidal could be a fun final fight for both of them. Let's just get on with it. Both of you fight each other and retire. But I'm not sure if that'll happen. But let's move on to Gilbert Burns. With this fight with Gilbert Burns, I really think it's a lose-lose situation for him. I really don't think this is going to affect his rankings either way. If you beat the 11th ranked seed and you're 5th, that literally means nothing. So I don't see much point of him taking this fight, and I'm curious why he took it at all. But do you think if he wins, do you think that'll push him up further, or do you think he'll kind of be in the same position he's already in?
I think name value, it'd be pushed up. If Gilbert beats Masvidal, his name value will rocket just because of how big of a name Masvidal is. You know, maybe not necessarily the rankings, but still, it is still a name that looks good on your resume to have defeated. And I think if Gilbert does finish Masvidal, the timings have probably lined up well. We could even see a rematch with Usman.
Yeah, that'd be really fun. I would actually love to see a rematch of Burns and Usman, or a rematch with Gilbert Burns and Hamza. I would love to see that fight again, but it's really tricky. We don't know where Hamzat's going to be. I'd normally ask, if the fighter loses, what fight you think they'd fit next. But I think, in all honesty, I think if he win or lose, he'd end up fighting roughly the same opponents anyway. So I don't think that matters too much.
Yeah, it doesn't affect ranking that a great deal, does it? You know, like if he does, mind you, if he loses to Masvidal, maybe it will, though, to be fair, because Gilbert isn't exactly young anymore, is he?
No. Yeah, I agree. I think he's not young either. Is he like 36 or something? You forget though, because he looks so young, doesn't he? But again, it's a fight that I'm really excited for, though. And I'm really curious what's going to happen next for both of them. Mark, do you have anything else to add before we finish up?
I was just going to say, like, if there's any sort of younger fighters or who have recently just become a fan of the UFC and they maybe just caught the last few years, you can't, as bad of a matchup on paper as this is for Jorge, you can't just write him off. He's extremely violent and he's extremely good in a brawl. If Gilbert wants a dogfight, Masvidal will be there all day, and then anything can happen. Masvidal is just violence personified in that sense of a stand-up brawl. I wouldn't write Masvidal off. It's so easy to when you watch the last few years of both of their careers, and on paper, you know, Burns being a BJJ expert and Masvidal not.
No, Masvidal is certainly not a jiu-jitsu expert, but I do think that's all we've got time for. Thank you for watching. If you can like, comment, and subscribe, it really does help us out.